Rachel Evans thought her life was finally settling into peace when she married Mark Turner. After years of living alone and rebuilding herself from a painful divorce, she believed this marriage would be her fresh start. Mark was a good man, calm, reliable, successful, the kind of person who made everything feel steady. They lived in a quiet suburb outside Seattle, surrounded by pine trees and soft rain. It wasn't a thrilling life, but it was safe. And after so many storms, Rachel had decided that safe was enough. That peace began to shift one early summer evening when Ethan, Mark's son from his first marriage, arrived at their doorstep. He was 24 tall, with dark hair that always seemed to fall into his eyes. Rachel had met him a few times before at family gatherings, but he'd always been distant, polite to the point of coldness. Mark had told her that Ethan had just lost his job and needed a place to stay for a few weeks. Rachel agreed easily. She wanted to be supportive. After all, she was trying to build a family, not just a marriage. The first few days passed quietly. Ethan kept mostly to himself, spending hours in his room or out walking. Rachel noticed he didn't talk much with Mark, though she wasn't sure why. There was a quiet tension between father and son that hung in the air, something unspoken but heavy. Mark didn't seem to notice or didn't want to talk about it. He was busy with work, leaving early and returning late, his mind always on his company's new project. One evening, Rachel went out onto the porch after dinner to enjoy the cool breeze. That's when she saw Ethan sitting there, sketching in a worn notebook. The porch light cast a soft glow over his page, and Rachel realized he was drawing the sunset the way the golden light hit the tops of the trees. She hesitated before saying, "That's beautiful." He looked up, a little startled, then smiled a quiet, gentle smile. "Thanks. It helps me clear my head." She sat on the step across from him. "You're really talented. Have you always drawn?" "Since I was a kid," he said. "Mom used to say I'd rather draw my feelings than talk about them." Rachel laughed softly. "That doesn't sound so bad. At least your art listens." That small exchange turned into a longer conversation. They talked about how peaceful Seattle's evenings were, about art, and about life's strange turns. Rachel was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. He was thoughtful and honest in a way that Mark rarely was. She didn't think much of it at first. It was just nice to be heard. But when she went to bed that night, she couldn't stop thinking about his sketch. The way he looked at the sky as if it was full of answers. Days passed, and Rachel found herself noticing Ethan more. She noticed how he always offered to help her in the kitchen, how he listened closely when she spoke, how he seemed to see things others missed. It wasn't romantic, at least not then, but it was different. There was a warmth in his presence that she hadn't felt in a long time. Mark was kind, but he was often distracted. Their marriage had become a collection of routines, dinners, polite questions, quiet nights. She didn't blame him. She knew adult life got busy. Still, she missed the feeling of being seen. One rainy afternoon, Mark left for a business trip. He'd be gone for a week, meeting clients in Chicago. Rachel waved him off, then spent most of the day cleaning and organizing the house. In the evening, she found Ethan again on the porch, this time sketching the rain. She stepped outside with a mug of tea. "You really like that spot, don't you?" she asked with a smile. He nodded. "It's the only place that feels calm. Everything else just spins too fast." She understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft rain. Then Ethan spoke again, his voice quiet. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you happy here?" Rachel was taken aback. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, his pencil pausing on the page. "You just seem distant sometimes, like you're here but not really here." She let out a slow breath. "Marriage isn't always what people imagine. It's not bad, it's just quieter than I expected." He nodded. "Quiet can be lonely." Rachel looked at him then, really looked at him, at the sadness in his eyes that didn't belong to someone so young. "You sound like someone who's felt that too," she said softly. Ethan gave a small, sad smile. Maybe. That conversation opened something between them. Over the next few days, they talked more not about love or desire, but about dreams, regrets, and what it meant to feel understood. Rachel began to see him not just as her stepson, but as another soul trying to find his place. She never meant for it to happen, but she began to feel a strange connection, gentle, unspoken, but undeniable. On the fourth night of Mark's trip, they ended up talking in the kitchen after dinner. The lights were dim, and the house was quiet. Rachel told Ethan about her dream of opening an art studio one day, a dream she had given up long ago. He listened intently, then said, "You should do it. You light up when you talk about it." She laughed, embarrassed. "I'm too old for that kind of thing." "You're not," he said firmly. "You just stopped believing you could." His words hit deeper than he probably realized. Rachel felt her throat tighten. "You sound like you've thought a lot about this." "I have," he said quietly. "You deserve someone who really sees you." Rachel froze. The words hung in the air like a secret neither of them had planned to share. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Rachel looked away, her heart racing. "Ethan," she whispered, not sure what to say next. He stood, breaking the tension. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. No," she interrupted softly. "It's okay." The silence stretched between them, heavy but not angry. Rachel could feel her heartbeat in her chest. She wasn't angry or offended, just shaken. She hadn't realized until that moment how invisible she'd been feeling. After that night, nothing was said, but everything was different. Ethan stayed polite, respectful, but Rachel could sense the change. The air between them carried an emotion neither dared to name. She told herself it was just confusion, that it would fade when Mark came home. But deep down, Rachel knew something had shifted inside her. Something quiet, fragile, and powerful. It wasn't love, not yet. It was the realization of how deeply she had been. Missing connection, and how unexpectedly. It had appeared in the form of someone she never thought would understand her so completely. And as the rain continued to fall outside that small Seattle house, Rachel felt the first tremor of a story that would soon change everything. After that night on the porch, Rachel tried to pretend nothing had changed. When Mark came back from his business trip, she smiled, cooked dinner, and listened to his stories about work. Everything looked normal, but inside, Rachel felt uneasy. Ethan's words kept echoing in her mind. "You deserve someone who really sees you." She tried to push them away, but they had already found a quiet place inside her heart. Ethan stayed polite and distant, as if trying to undo what he had said. He spent most of his time applying for jobs online or sketching in his room. But even without speaking much, there was a silent understanding between them. Whenever their eyes met across the room, Rachel felt something she didn't know how to name. Not love. Not attraction, but a pull. Gentle and confusing. One morning, she found one of his sketches left on the kitchen table. It was a drawing of her, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, the sunlight falling softly over her shoulders. The details were delicate, almost too real. She felt her breath catch. It wasn't romantic or inappropriate, but it carried emotion, warmth, respect, and something deeper. Something that made her heart tremble. When Ethan walked in, she quickly set the paper down. "You drew this?" she asked. He nodded shyly. "Sorry, I should have asked before sketching you." "You just looked peaceful?" Rachel didn't know what to say. "It's beautiful," she finally whispered. "Thank you." From that day on, a quiet tension began to live between them. They didn't speak about what had happened, but everything felt different. Rachel started avoiding long conversations with him, afraid of what might slip through in her tone or eyes. Yet somehow, she always found herself noticing his presence, the sound of his footsteps, soft laughter, the way he helped her carry groceries without being asked. Mark, as usual, was busy. His long hours at the office left Rachel and Ethan alone more often. In the evenings, when the house grew still, they sometimes ended up in the same room, talking about small things, movies, music, life. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't innocent either. There was an emotion between them that neither of them wanted, but neither could fully ignore. One Sunday, they went grocery shopping together. Mark had forgotten his car keys, and Rachel needed help carrying things. At the store, she noticed how kind Ethan was. Not in a grand way, but in small gestures. He reached for things on high shelves, carried the heavy bags, made her laugh over silly brand names. It all felt easy, like they had known each other for years. On the drive back, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, too peaceful. Then Ethan said quietly, "I've been offered a job." Rachel looked over, surprised. "Really? That's great news." "Where?" "Portland," he replied. "It's a small design firm. I start next month." "It's wonderful," she said with a forced smile. "I'm happy for you." But the truth was, something inside her sank. She didn't know why. Maybe it was because she had grown used to his company, to the way he filled the quiet spaces in her life. That night, Mark was happy to hear the news. "Finally, some good luck for him," he said, raising his glass at dinner. "Portland's a good city for creative people." Ethan smiled, but Rachel noticed the flicker of sadness in his eyes. Later that night, she found him in the backyard staring at the stars. She hesitated before stepping outside. "You should be happy," she said softly. "This is what you wanted." "I am," he said. Then, after a pause, he added, "It's just hard to leave things unfinished." She looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" He turned to her, his eyes gentle but full of something unspoken. "I mean, this connection. Whatever it is. It feels like it started just when it has to end." Rachel's heart raced. "Ethan, you shouldn't." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. You've done nothing wrong. But you've made me see things differently. You reminded me that people can care without saying much." Rachel swallowed hard. "You've reminded me of that too." The wind moved softly through the trees. They stood there in silence, the night air thick with emotion neither could express. Rachel wanted to tell him that he had helped her feel alive again, but the words stayed trapped behind her lips. A few days later, Ethan began packing his things. The house felt heavy and quiet. Rachel avoided watching him, afraid that if she did, her feelings would show. She tried to focus on small tasks, folding laundry, cooking dinner, anything to keep her mind busy. But every time she walked past his room, her heart tugged painfully. On the morning of his departure, Mark drove him to the station. Rachel stood in the doorway watching Ethan load his bags into the car. Their eyes met one last time. He gave her a small smile, the kind that said everything words couldn't. She smiled back, forcing herself not to cry. When the car disappeared down the street, Rachel stood there for a long time. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. She went back inside, her hands trembling slightly. On the kitchen table lay a folded piece of paper. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small sketch of the backyard porch where they had first talked. At the bottom, Ethan had written, "Thank you for seeing me." Rachel pressed the paper to her chest, tears slipping down her face. It wasn't love, she told herself. It was connection. A brief moment between two people who understood each other at the right or maybe the wrong time that night. Mark called Ethan to make sure he arrived safely. Rachel listened quietly, pretending to tidy up the living room. When Mark hung up, he said, "He sounds happy already. Maybe this move will help him start over." Rachel smiled faintly. Yes, maybe it will. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just Ethan who would have to start over. She too had to find her way back to her marriage, to her life, and to herself. For days afterward, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about their last moment. She didn't regret anything. But she couldn't deny that Ethan had touched a part of her she had forgotten existed. The part that still believed in quiet understanding. In being truly seen, the house felt emptier than before. Yet in a strange way, Rachel felt more awake. Something inside her had shifted forever, and though she would never say it aloud, she knew the truth that sometimes the people who aren't meant to stay still leave behind lessons that change you completely. After Ethan left, the house felt quieter than ever. Rachel tried to fill her days with small routines, cleaning, cooking, gardening, but no matter how busy she kept herself, something always felt missing. It wasn't just Ethan's presence she missed. It was the warmth, the conversations, the way he had seen her when no one else did. She felt guilty for even thinking about it, but emotions didn't follow rules. They simply lingered. Mark didn't notice much of the change in her. He was caught up in work as usual, proud of how Ethan was finally settling down. Whenever he mentioned his son's new job in Portland, Rachel smiled politely and said she was happy for him. But deep inside, each mention reminded her of the empty space Ethan had left behind. One rainy evening, Rachel sat by the window, the same spot Ethan had once sketched her in. She looked outside at the blurred city lights, thinking about how strange life could be. Just months ago, she had thought she was content. Now she felt lost between loyalty and longing, between the life she had built and the emotions she had never expected. Her phone buzzed suddenly. It was a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her heart skipped. It was from Ethan. The message said, "You were right. Art can heal if you let it." Attached was a photo of a painting, a sunset over a new city skyline. The same orange and gold hues she had once seen him sketch back in Seattle. Rachel stared at it for a long time. A soft smile touched her lips, followed by a quiet tear. Ethan was moving on, finding his place in the world. And somehow, that thought brought her peace. Maybe what they shared wasn't meant to become something more. Maybe it was simply meant to remind them both of what they needed to heal that night. When Mark came home, she decided to talk, not about Ethan, but about their marriage. She waited until after dinner when the house was calm. "Mark," she began softly, "do you ever feel like we've become distant?" He looked up, surprised. "Distant? What do you mean?" Rachel hesitated. "We don't talk like we used to. I feel like we've been living side by side, not together." Sighed and leaned back. "Work's been stressful, Rachel. You know that. I thought you understood." "I do," she said gently. "But understanding doesn't make it less lonely." For a moment, there was silence. Then Mark rubbed his forehead. "I guess I haven't been paying attention. I didn't realize you felt that way." Rachel nodded. I miss us. The way we used to care about the little things. The way we used to laugh." Care words seemed to soften something in him. "Maybe we both got comfortable," he said quietly. "I thought stability was enough, but maybe we lost something along the way." It was the first honest conversation they'd had in months. They didn't solve everything that night, but they started talking again, really talking, about their dreams, about how they could make time for each other. Rachel suggested small changes: dinner together once a week, a walk on weekends, less time on phones. Mark agreed. It wasn't a grand promise, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Rachel noticed subtle changes. Mark came home earlier some evenings. They cooked together. He asked her opinion about things again. Slowly, the distance began to shrink. Yet in quiet moments, Rachel still thought about Ethan, not with desire, but with gratitude. He had reminded her that connection mattered. That love wasn't just about being together, but about truly seeing one another. One afternoon, while organizing her studio, Rachel came across the sketch Ethan had left behind the one of the porch. She looked at it for a long time before placing it inside a small frame. She didn't do it out of nostalgia. She did it as a reminder of how far she had come. That brief connection had pushed her to rediscover herself. Time passed. Autumn came to Seattle, painting the city in golden leaves and misty mornings. Rachel started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Her first piece was of the view outside her window, soft light breaking through gray clouds. When Mark saw it, he smiled. "That's beautiful," he said. "You've got talent, Rachel. Why did you ever stop?" She smiled quietly. "Life got busy, I suppose, but I'm ready to start again." Mark encouraged her to keep going. On weekends, he even helped her set up a small corner in the living room for her art supplies. They began spending more time together: dinners by candlelight, simple movie nights, long walks in the park. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Rachel felt hope returning, slow but steady. One evening, she received another message from Ethan. This time it was a photo of an art exhibit. In the background was one of his sketches, the same sunset she had seen months ago, now displayed under warm gallery lights. The caption read, "First gallery showing. Thank you for believing in me." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She typed back, "I'm proud of you, Ethan. Keep creating," he replied, "and you keep living." That short exchange left her heart light. She realized that their story was never meant to end in love or regret. It was about two souls crossing paths at the right moment to remind each other what truly mattered. The next day, Rachel showed the photo to Mark. "Ethan's doing really well," she said with a smile. Mark nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "I'm glad. Maybe I wasn't the best father, but it's good to see him finding his way." Rachel touched his hand gently. "You're doing better now. That matters too." As winter approached, Rachel's art began to attract attention. A local cafe offered to display her paintings. Mark was thrilled, helping her frame the pieces. The day they hung the paintings, Rachel stood back and felt a deep sense of peace. She had finally found herself again, not through someone else, but through the strength that had always been within her. Later that evening, as she watched the city lights flicker through the rain, she thought about how strange life could be. Sometimes it takes the briefest connection to remind you of everything you've forgotten: your voice, your passion, your worth. Rachel didn't regret anything that had happened. Ethan had come into her life like a mirror, showing her what she had lost sight of. But the lesson wasn't about forbidden love. It was about rediscovery, about choosing to live fully again. When Mark wrapped his arm around her shoulders that night, she leaned into him, truly present. "You seem happier lately," he said softly. "I am," she replied. "I think I just needed to wake up." The rain outside grew heavier, but inside their home, it felt warm for the first time in a long while. Rachel smiled, knowing that healing didn't always come from perfect choices. Sometimes it came from the ones that made you face your truth. And as she turned off the light and walked to bed, she whispered to herself, maybe everything happened exactly as it was meant to. A year passed since Ethan left, and life for Rachel and Mark began to feel whole again. The house that once carried echoes of silence now felt alive. Rachel's art had become more than a hobby. It was her new beginning. She spent her mornings in the small studio Mark had helped her set up, painting scenes from memory, softsunlight.com, waters, and faces that told stories without words. Mark often came in to watch her paint, bringing her coffee and gentle smiles that reminded her of the man she had once fallen in love with. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was honest now. They had both learned that love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, listening, and being patient. For Rachel, healing had come slowly, through brushstrokes and quiet forgiveness, not just for Mark, but for herself. One morning in early spring, she received a small envelope in the mail. There was no return address, only her name written in familiar handwriting. Her heart quickened as she opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small painting. It was Ethan's work. She knew it instantly. The painting showed a woman sitting by a window, sunlight falling over her face, just like the sketch he had once made of her. But this time, the image was different. The colors were brighter, the woman's expression peaceful and free. At the bottom, in neat writing, he had signed his name and added one line, "For the woman who taught me how to see beauty again." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't sadness, it was gratitude, deep and quiet. She smiled through her tears and sat there for a while, letting the memories wash over her. Ethan wasn't a secret or a mistake. He was a chapter in her life that had shown her how to feel again. When Mark came home that evening, she showed him the painting. He studied it for a moment, then looked at her with a small smile. "He's talented," he said. "You must have inspired him." Rachel nodded. "Maybe we both did," she said softly. They decided to hang the painting in her studio. It wasn't a secret anymore. It was simply art, honest and human. Each time she looked at it, she felt a mix of nostalgia and peace. It reminded her that love, in all its forms, had the power to change people, even when it didn't last forever. In the following months, Rachel's art began to draw attention from local galleries. She was invited to display her collection, a series called Silent Connections. Each painting told a story of emotion without words, to people in quiet understanding. A single figure under a sunset, hands almost touching but not quite. The paintings reflected everything she had lived through: longing, healing, rediscovery. At the exhibition opening, Mark stood proudly beside her, introducing her to guests and admiring her courage. Rachel felt truly content for the first time in years. She had found balance between her past and her present, between pain and peace. Later that night, as the event came to a close, Rachel received a message on her phone. It was from Ethan again. "Saw the photos from your exhibit? Your art is incredible, Rachel. I'm glad you kept painting." She smiled as she typed back, "Thank you, Ethan. I'm proud of you too. You've found your path." A minute later, his reply came, "You helped me find it." Rachel stared at the screen, her heart full but calm. There was no confusion, no longing, only respect and understanding. They were two people who had met at a moment when they both needed light. And now they had both found it in their own ways, weeks later. As she prepared for her next collection, Rachel invited Mark to help her choose themes. "What should I paint next?" she asked. He smiled. "Paint something that feels like us now." "Something new." She thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe I'll call it Second Chances." Mark nodded. "That sounds perfect." Their evenings became peaceful again, dinners filled with laughter, conversations about art and travel, long walks by the water. It wasn't the same as when they first married. It was better. It was real, steady, and built on truth. One Sunday morning, Rachel and Mark drove to a nearby art fair. The sky was clear, and the city shimmered under spring sunlight. As they walked past stalls filled with paintings and crafts, Rachel stopped suddenly. There, in a corner booth, were several paintings signed with a familiar name, Ethan Turner. She smiled as she walked closer. Ethan was standing behind the booth, talking to a customer. When he noticed Rachel, surprise and warmth crossed his face. "Rachel," he said, coming forward. "I didn't expect to see you here." "It's good to see you," she said kindly. "Your work is beautiful." "Thank you," he replied, smiling. "Looks like we both found what we were meant to do." Join them, shaking Ethan's hand warmly. "It's great to finally meet you again," he said. "Your stepmother's been your biggest fan." Ethan laughed softly. "She's been a great inspiration." They talked for a few minutes, light, easy conversation. When they said goodbye, there was no sadness, no tension, only gratitude. As they walked away, Rachel felt something lift inside her, a sense of closure, gentle and full of grace. That evening, as she and Mark drove home, he reached over and took her hand. "You know," he said, "sometimes I think people come into our lives to remind us who we are." Rachel smiled, her eyes on the glowing horizon. "I think you're right," she said. "And some leave behind lessons we never forget." When they returned home, Rachel stood in her studio looking at Ethan's painting on the wall. The sunlight from the window touched its surface, making it glow. She realized that the story wasn't about forbidden love or guilt. It was about rediscovery, about two souls crossing paths to help each other grow. She whispered quietly, "Some people aren't meant to stay. They're meant to wake your heart." Rachel turned off the light and walked out of the studio, leaving the painting bathed in the evening glow. Life had moved forward, and so had she. Love, she now understood, wasn't about who stayed. It was about what they left behind: kindness, courage, and a reminder to keep your heart open, no matter how many times it breaks in the end. Rachel had found her peace not by forgetting her past, but by embracing it with grace. Ethan had taught her how to see beauty again, and Mark had shown her how to hold on to it. Together, their stories had blended into something quiet and lasting, a truth born not of passion, but of understanding. As night settled over Seattle, Rachel stood by the window one last time, looking out at the shimmering lights. She smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you, Ethan, for reminding me to live." And with that, she turned away from the past and walked toward the life she had rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and full of light.